Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at onpurposely.com.
Welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast, a resource for parents who feel overwhelmed and outpaced as they raise healthy youth in a tech world. As an educator, parent, and tech user, I want to equip parents with the tools, resources, and confidence they need to raise kids who love God and use tech. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast. My name is Nathan Sutherland, and this podcast is dedicated to helping us love God and use tech. Tonight, we have the privilege and the honor of speaking with Yu-kai Chou, one of the world's preeminent minds and thinkers in the area of gamification since 2003. He is a brother in the Lord. He has a young family, and his work is dedicated to really helping companies and individuals create products that are useful and engaging. And I'm excited personally because this is really the intersection, Yu-kai, of my kind of personal story, what I do on a daily basis, and the reason I do it, because I personally was unhealthy with gaming. And so I'm super excited to just have you here, hear your thoughts, and learn a bit from you. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. And I guess, there's more to be said. I didn't mention Octalysis, both the group and your work. But would you tell us a little bit about, I guess, yourself, how you found yourself in this tech world, and specifically your work with gamification?
Sure. So in 2003, I stumbled upon the concept of gamification, and I just obsessively started to go down a rabbit hole learn. And interestingly enough, 2003 is also the year that I became a Christian. So coincidental or not, up to you. And so over the years, I started many different startups. In 2012, I published my framework called the Octalysis framework, which is what I'm most known for, is octagon plus analysis, which is Octalysis. I published it on my blog, yukaichui.com, and it was picked up very quickly. And it was organically translated into, I think, 16 different languages in the first year. And so then I started getting a lot of opportunities to teach my framework at places like Stanford University, Yale, Oxford, Tesla, Google, IDEO, BCG, Lego, a lot of places. And a few organizations in Europe have rated me the number one gamification guru in the world out of a list of 100 gamification experts and gurus. I think it's 3 out of 4 years. And then later I became a judge. So the joke is that I got disqualified to be a guru. Yeah. And so I published a book called Action of Gamification, Beyond Points, Badges, and Leaderboards. And so that one, if you go to Google Scholar and you type in the word Octalysis, my work and my book has been cited by PhD theses and academic journals close to 2,000 times. And sold a little over 100,000 copies. And I know at least a handful of billionaires have reached out and they said they're fans of my book. Maybe they're 100 millionaires, depending on sometimes where crypto's at or whatever.
Depending this week, it may not be a good week to be.
Yeah, maybe they're like a 2 millionaire, and then last year they were a 1 billionaire. So. I usually like everyone has a fraction of $1 billion. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, and this is why I didn't read it off the list, because I would still be going through it. You have this just incredible background, and not to mention that the companies you worked for, which you have listed a few, like that's impacted billions now of user experiences. So everyone listening to this, the things you use, not just video games, because you might say, well, and we'll get to this, but you might say, well, I don't play video games. Like, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking gamification. Your user experience has been impacted either directly by Yu-kai's work or by people being inspired by Yu-kai's work and going, you know what? So would you help us define that term, gamification? What do we mean?
Yeah, so gamification is applying all the fun, exciting elements in games and applying that into things that are productive and non-game-like. So things like healthcare, education, managing money, all those things that we know we should do, we should spend more time in life on, but we spend very little on because it's not, or we don't enjoy doing it. So, me as a gamification expert, I rarely work with gaming companies because the sweet spot of gamification are things that are very important, but potentially mundane, potentially intimidating. So like I said, healthcare, education, but also things that are very competitive, like retail, which you just have to do a lot to stand out. One thing in my background experience I didn't want to leave out for this podcast specifically is I was also the head of Creative Labs and head of digital commerce for HTC, doing VR, AR, and metaverse stuff. And the reason why I don't want to leave it out is because what attracted me to help HTC is the founder, Shir Wang. She's also a very strong believer. And she said she started HTC to honor God. And she's publicly made that statement too. She went to my church when I was going to Fremont in California. And sometimes we'll get an anonymous donor of, earthquake kits with a Bible in it, and everyone knows it's her. So I kind of grew up being inspired to help her expand the kingdom of God with my work.
Oh man. So, all right, let's put a pin in your work with HTC and metaverse, AR, VR, because I've got questions and not a lot of people I can ask. So I want to come back to that because what I don't want to do is jump ahead of all of the amazing kind of insights you can give us into this. And I want to take it two directions, but let's start here. In your personal, so you mentioned your faith, 2003 was the same year that you came to a repentant faith in the Lord, and that you started this Octalysis process of analyzing what tech works and why. Walk me through the faith side. Like, I guess, how did you get to the point in tech world where you're like, yeah, this is my faith journey? Like, give me a little bit of your testimony.
That's like another hour testimonial talk by itself. But I'd say, like, I grew up as an argumentative agnostic, which is I argue with Christians who tell me about Jesus and I make them look stupid. Yeah. Maybe not on purpose, but it's just sometimes at the time I felt they're very aggressive. They're very aggressive and they're pushing on me, and I just ask them questions and they can't answer. And so I thought, okay, so this stuff is like, Greek mythology, right? There's things that just don't make sense. You challenge people and they get upset about it. And it's like, hey, I'm not going to believe everything you tell me. So you got to make sense. So I challenge them. And this is the thing where a lot of Christians, they came to Christ because they're touched, their spirit are touched, they feel the grace and they go in, but they haven't done all the apologetics work to answer tough questions, which is not as important. And then, so not in tech world. At the time, I was still a student, actually. So I started developing gamification as a student. I started my first business first year in college. But as a student, I was in the chess club and I was one of the top 2 players in the chess club. The other guy, Chris Shedler, he was a Christian. He invited me to go to his church. I said no, because I had a bad experience before. And then next week he invited me again. I said no again. He invited me 6 weeks in a row. And I felt bad, I was a mean person. So I said, okay, I'll go. But my objective was just to tell him, I didn't like him. So he would stop inviting me. And so I went there, and I think just hearing the music changed my heart a bit. I think I was touched by the Holy Spirit. And then the pastor actually was quite knowledgeable. So he answered some of the questions I asked. And that was a turning point where I thought, hey, maybe, I thought these questions had no answers, right? And now they do. So maybe all my questions would have answers. So then I started digging into scripture myself, doing research, archaeology. And then I found out that I was convinced that it's all true. So I realized there was no reason to pretend I wasn't convinced. So I became a Christian. And then suddenly like, oh, it's not that I just was convinced. It comes with a whole package of things about changing my life and doing things differently, right? And so that kind of led to everything else.
Yeah, which it does, right? Like this whole concept of so I was a middle school teacher for 10 years before starting this. And the very same thing that drove me to work with young people drove me to step out of the classroom and like start talking about what does it look like to take the hope of the gospel, connect it with technology. Like you can't just keep it in a corner. Once you're convinced it's true, it does bleed over. And so you then you became a Christian, you started talking about tech. That's clearly like impacted why you want to help people make great products. So I guess, from that point on, did tech it stayed awesome for you?
I'll make a clarification. Gamification is not necessarily just tech, just like games could be World of Warcraft, a lot of technology, and it could be hide and seek, no technology. So the key is it's a design philosophy about applying game design to everyday life. So sometimes our work is thinking about incentive programs or parenting, right? We don't need to use tech for parenting. It's about how to motivate people, engage people. So when I first discovered gamification, it was not about the technology. It was about how to convert my own life into a game. And so I no longer saw myself as a student just trying to get barely minimally acceptable grades and then go play games. I saw myself as a player in this world, and I need to accumulate experience, learn new skills, get alliance, finish quests. And so that led me down this path. So at the time, I did not know I would do a lot of technology, just applying game design to my own life.
Yeah, and maybe let's take that there for the parents listening right now. Where's a spot we might have seen this? Give us a tech example and a non-tech example to put you on the spot that we might just see in like our everyday life.
I think it's good to use ones that people are familiar with. So if you're familiar with Duolingo, a language learning app, they use their mobile app, which is a technology, and they use a lot of little gamified techniques in terms of having a cute owl talk to you. You have your skill tree, one advanced to another. You have your lives. You have a streak design. So these are all simple game elements that are built into an app that goes from function-focused design, which is just delivering the course content, to human-focused design. There are things that are purely there for motivational sake, to engage you, to drive you to want to do more of it. Khan Academy has similar things. There's a variety of those things. And then if you look at non-tech, so there's also, I don't know if you consider, most people don't consider tech, like you go to kindergarten and they give you gold stickers for doing something well, right? Most people don't consider that a technology. So, and that just goes into the 8 core drives of the Octalysis framework. So that's core drive 2, development accomplishment. So you could use technology, you could stickers, you could use words of encouragement to make people feel accomplished. You make them feel like they're progressing, they're leveling up. So that's one of the 8 core drives. You can also use technology or a dice, or just setting up rules or words of unpredictability to make things feel uncertain and interesting and kind of like sometimes obsessively like grabbing people into it. And so that's core drive 7, unpredictability and curiosity. So you can use tech and non-tech ways to get people to engage with these 8 core drives of the gamification framework Octalysis.
Yeah, so you just referenced there you have 8 drives in Octalysis, hence the Oct. So you've got 8 core drives and then 5 levels of analyzing these 8 core drives, which we will not deep dive into that today. But would you just say the 8 so that people can kind of hear as they're thinking through both what they're doing as parents, how the Lord is calling them to live, and the tech that we do use, and like that they can be thinking through, like, where's the engagement, the gamification in this? Yeah.
So core drive 1 is epic, meaning, and calling. It's doing something bigger than yourself, and it's the core drive that powers our faith. Donation, sustainability, sometimes politics, patriotism. Core drive 2 is development, accomplishment. It's growth and feeling accomplished, things like that. Core drive 3 is empowerment of creativity and feedback. So that's basically using your creativity, meaningful choices, self-expression, autonomy. Core drive 4 is ownership and possession. So it's the idea of owning something, protecting it, getting more, collecting things, investing your time to customize things, or something's learning about you, so feel more attachment to it. Core drive 5 is social influence and relatedness. So that's everything you do based on what other people do, think, or say, like social pressure, like competition, collaboration, appreciation. Core drive 6 is scarcity and impatience. So this is basically you want something just because you can't have it, or it's very, very difficult to obtain. So it's like the sin core drive. You're not allowed to do it, suddenly creates desire to do it. Right. But if you can do it anytime, you don't care. Core drive 7 is unpredictability and curiosity that I mentioned. It's because you don't know what's going to happen next, you're always thinking about it. So on a lighter scale, it's why we want to finish a book or movie or just learn. We're curious. On a deeper scale, it becomes like gambling addiction. Core drive 8 is loss and avoidance. So you want to avoid a loss. You don't want something bad to happen, or you're avoiding some kind of behavioral change that you should do. So these are the 8 core drives that form the Octalysis. And what's useful to talk about is that everything we do in this world is based on one or more of these 8 core drives, which means that if there's none of these 8 core drives there's zero motivation, no behavior happens. And then out of those 8, there's different natures. And this is important for parenting. There's what we call white hat motivation core drives. That's our 1, 2, 3, epic meaning, development, accomplishment, empowerment of creating feedback. Those make people feel powerful, in control. They feel good, but there's no sense of urgency because we're in full control. So we procrastinate. And those are things, if you spend time doing it, you want to do it. If you spend time doing it, you feel great. But again, there's no urgency. So it's like, hey, I got to go to church tomorrow, but yeah, I have a test like a Monday. So I think I'm going to skip church, right? Church is very important. It's epic meaning and calling. If we do it, we feel great. We study the Bible more, but then, there's something more urgent, which goes into the black hat motivation. So that's 6, 7, and 8. So scarcity, you don't know, you want something you can't get, or exclusive offer in the marketplace, unpredictable curiosity. So it's like, what's on Netflix? What's on Instagram? What's happening next? Gambling addiction, core drive, loss and avoidance. There's this deadline I have to go meet. So we want to spend all the time on the white hat activities, but then we end up spending all our time on the black hat activities. And but then we don't feel we're in control and we feel bad about it.
Yeah. And so as a parent, I'll tell you, when I go in and I do a workshop, so my workshops tend to focus on really 3 questions. Or I guess the first one's like a cheating is an A, B, and a C, but like, how do you address the big 3? So how do we talk about social media, video games, pornography? That's the first thing we hit out of the gates, because I used to put it at the end of the talk. And my wife's like, no one's listening until you get these 3 out of the way. So we have that. And then how do I know if my tech use is healthy? All right. Joined with the, what can I do if it's not? And ending with, how do we make tech safe at home? So most of my content being gospel tech is, we're talking digital technology, and specifically dealing with really what I split it into 2 categories. I call it tool tech and drool tech that helps us create, tech that helps us consume. And I do that specifically because I've seen in the research and then in application and even in design that they're designed differently, which brings me to this question of, is there ever a time when gamification can go too far, where almost the engagement hooks are too strong, either by age or just by product? You mentioned gambling as an example, where whether it's because it's black hat or just because it's really unfair by design, that once you buy into the premise that it's going to become too attractive, is that a thing that you've seen in your Octalysis work?
Yeah, so Octalysis and gamification design is a tool to make something interesting. So, what you're making more interesting has a ton of consequences, and how you make it interesting also has a lot of consequences. So the white hat, black, there's also what we call left brain versus right brain core drives that I'm not going into yet, but that is the nature of the motivation. There's not necessarily a good or evil for it. And then there's the intent of the motivation. So you can use white hat motivation to get people to do evil things. And while they're doing, they feel they're saving the world. But you can also use black hat motivation to get people to study the Bible more, or study harder, eat healthily, exercise more. You're exercising more because you don't want to get a disease, right? That's core drive, weight loss, and avoidance. So there's the intent of the motivation, and so that's important. Are you getting people to just watch a lot of unhealthy things or click on random ads? Is that the goal? Or you're trying to get people to have healthier habits and spend more time with their family? So defining what's the desired behavior is number 1 in terms of what we look at from a morality standpoint. And then there's some nature. So nature, literally, white hat, black hat, literally means that you feel in control, you feel out of control. And then again, there's left brain, right brain. Left brain deals with extrinsic motivation, things you do for a reward purpose or a goal, but you don't necessarily enjoy the activity itself. So once you obtain the reward, you hit your goals or you get used to the reward, become stale, you stop doing the behavior. So people who pay their kids to do homework, sometimes it doesn't go so well, because once you stop paying, they have even less motivation than
sure.
before.
You get the exhaustion of that behavior now, because it's hit this different level of stimuli.
It's called the over justification effect. And so sometimes it's better to say, hey, do it for the curiosity to learn. Like when kids are focused on grades, they're no longer curious. They just want to find the place in the book that has the right answer and write it in, but they're no longer curious about, why is this the right answer? Let's read around the context and search for it. The right brain core drives are things we just enjoy doing, to the point that we're even willing to pay money to experience it. And even if we lost all our progress the next day, we would still want to do that activity today. So back to that, if you look at core drive 7, unpredictable and curiosity, that's on the right bottom of the octagon, which means it's right brain, which is intrinsic, and black hat. So it means our brains enjoy it, but we feel out of control. So you're watching Netflix, right? And you plan to go to bed at 10 p.m., but then you binge watch at 3 a.m. in the morning. Again, your brain enjoyed it, intrinsic, right brain, but you feel out of control. Right? So that's an example of the right bottom. Now, the left top is core drive 2, development accomplishment, white hat and extrinsic. So you feel great and in control as long as you're improving yourself and actually achieving high results, but it's results oriented, extrinsic. So the moment you feel like you plateau, you stop doing the behavior because you don't enjoy the activity itself. You just do it for the results, not the experience.
Right. So then when we look at, can this be done in a way that encourages unhealthy behavior? You're saying basically yes on both sides, because it's not about healthy and unhealthy. It's about in control and out of control. So if I see my child with, you say, compulsive behavior. So one of the ways I tell parents, hey, let's assess if we're just the old person standing with the rake saying, get off my lawn because we don't understand this tech. It's not what we like. Or if this is actually an issue, is we just make an acronym called RESET, go, all right, does it impede or improve our relationships and responsibilities, emotions, sleep, enjoyment, time? So we look at that. And if parents go, nope, it's a 0 out of 5, it's not actually hurting any of these areas, and go, great, you may not like it, but it's not actually negative for your kid, right? They're engaged with it. They're loving it.
Yeah, but most things in the Bible are about moderation, right? Love of money is evil, but having money is okay. Jesus's first miracle is turning water into wine after people have drunk a lot of wine, right? So he's like keeping the party going, right? And so, but obviously drinking a ton of wine is not good in the Christian faith and belief. So I think a lot of, and I think if Paul was here today, he would be using all sorts of social media, preaching, like back then he only had pen and paper, right? And ships that get wrecked. So so he would, from my understanding of him, he would be using all the tools available to reach people, to convince people. He probably want to go on some funny judge shows and talk about the faith.
You think so? I'm gonna have to.
He wants an audience.
I'm gonna think about that, because I guess I would ask you, do you feel like the medium makes the message sometimes with some of this gamified tech, in that, and this specifically again, because my world is in for the most part the tech side, so allow me to stick there. And if you have an analog or non-digital example, feel free to throw it in. But when I think, let's say Paul, and even the place of social media in evangelizing, there is so much gamification, and in some of the negatively motivated black and white hatted. So whether it's snap streaks or leaderboards or infinite scrolls or like buttons or notifications or whatever engagement tool we are using, there's no goal other than more engagement. That's the entire goal. I want you to, your time, your focus, your money. I want you to come back for longer periods of time, more frequently. And then I want you to, you buy stuff or get me money because your focus is worth money.
Clicking on ads.
Yeah. Click on ads, or just be the bait out there for the big fish. And so I guess I would ask, do you believe that all the same conversations that can happen in real life and face-to-face can be done as valuable, which, by the way, I would tie this to that HTC conversation I wanted to come back to, and the idea of church in a metaverse or in augmented reality, et cetera. So,
yeah. So your question actually connects to what you mentioned about tech that allows you to create and tech that allows you to consume. I think you call them tool tech versus a drool tech.
Yeah.
And so when I talk about Paul wanting to be at those places, he's creating, right? He is sharing content, and it's good for a core drive 1 epic meaning calling cause. He's talking about the gospel, the faith, and bring the Gentiles to the what was before the Jewish faith. Now the problem is that this is not the same as consume tech, which is people there going there. We don't recommend our kids to go to all these places. We recommend our pastors, right? We recommend our the people who are sharing the spirit, the faith, to go to all these places. Like Jesus goes to prostitutes, Jesus goes to tax collectors. So we encourage people to go there. But for our children, we still, I wouldn't say control them, because scarcity creates desire. And there's lots of examples I can share there, but we need to empower them, educate them, and tell them there are places that you can immerse yourself that builds yourself, builds your character, builds your spirit. and is beneficial. And there's places that you can go and that is just, it invisibly tears you down without you realizing.
Yeah. So then, all right, these will be my last two, because I've got all these. I love hearing your thoughts on this. With the expansion into the metaverse, with Meta, the actual company attempting to do this now, teaming with local American churches who have signed NDAs on saying what's happening. But we do know that there's this concept of we are bringing church experience, a religious experience, to the metaverse. Neil Postman, author of Amusing Ourselves to Death, would blow a gasket at this. He would say this is absolutely not the place for a religious experience because it strips away all of the actual essence of it and gives you only the shell. Would you agree with that take? Or do you believe that there is actually this place of, hey, there's hurting people there, so we bring the gospel there, and Paul and Jesus would do it?
Yeah, I think I agree that face-to-face is probably the best experience and most likely the best experience, but a lot of people can't get that, right? And so if we're saying, hey, if we can't have the best experience, we don't even want it anywhere else, then I think churches would be very, very limited, right? It's just like saying, oh, you can't read the Bible on a digital format. You only have to read the physical paper, right? No, you have to read it. Can't read it
in the King James version, of course.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can. You can't read it on a modern book. You have to read it through scrolls, right? So where does that stop? Oh, you shouldn't talk about faith on Twitter, right? You shouldn't talk about God on a blog post, right? On a podcast, and I think yeah. I mean that was obviously sarcastic. So especially to this audience. So the thing is that the gospel reaches people. People need to be cared about. They need to feel appreciated. They need to feel like they are loved by God, but as a medium of people they're interacting with who believes in God. And so I believe that needs to be everywhere. And so I personally believe that the technology is still very preliminary, but when you get to full immersion, having fellowship gatherings in the metaverse would be better than doing it on Twitter or than a Zoom call. So The question is, would you want to do that if it could be better than a Zoom call?
Okay. Yeah. So I will just say personally, from my experience, my concern of entering a world designed for distraction and total control, which is the metaverse, right? Like we're so disillusioned with this world, we're going to go make our own, and we're going to be kings and gods of that world, and then submitting to God within it does sort of break my brain, but I'm open to the concept, and that actually leads. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you're, and this is their branding work. You think the metaverse is what Meta wants to do with the metaverse, and so the metaverse is literally just a persistent, immersive virtual environment that you feel like you're in the real world, right? And so Meta, because their monetization model is advertisement. So number one, they track everything you do, and all they want you to pay. So just like it's the intent. The metaverse itself is not something about control. It's not something about being kings. It's a technology platform like email to allow people to interact with each other or with content. And so why it's created, who created that metaverse? And, there's all these players trying to come into that space doing different things. Some just want to do it for gaming, some do it for other things, or going to concerts. So we can have, definitely have a great worship concert in the metaverse, which would be different. They sell tickets, right? But then afterwards, it's just, they're not trying to get you addicted. They're trying to have you enjoy a good 2-hour experience. That's it. Yeah. So I think that's the thing. You want to think about the motive and who's creating it, and then either be part of creating the good things in the metaverse, the good metaverses out there, or at least be able to discern.
Yeah, that's really, thank you for those thoughts on that. And I guess I would end on this because I promised two, so this is my second one. So personally, a little bit of my story arc was the reason I actually am doing what I'm doing right now is because 11 years ago, like 3 days ago, was 11 years ago, on May 15th, the Lord heavily convicted me that my gaming wasn't actually just a hobby. It was kind of become the ultimate thing in my life. I was getting back to it, even though it wasn't much time. My heart was fully dedicated to gaming and getting back to games. I had a master's degree in education. I was a teacher. I was married. I had a house. Like I thought I had things together. And the Lord's like, no, because this corner of your life, which isn't bad, isn't good. So when I quit it, I started working with young people, realized, oh, I don't love teaching. I love seeing young people reach their potential, which is why I actually quit teaching and is what brought me to speaking to you right now today. And yet I know what you just mentioned, that if I just simply say never and lock it out, there is this concern that it'll fester, right? That they'll never actually see how really, truly unsatisfying video games can be in light of God's goodness and the joy he gives us. And like that juxtaposition actually is part of what helps wilt that weed from growing. Would you say that is accurate? Is there in the world of gamification, I guess, help me as a parent here. How much of my fear is founded and how much of my fear?
So first of all, from a scripture standpoint, anything that prevents you from putting God first is an idol, right? That's bad. And some things are more likely to make you want to put them ahead of God. So that's a risk. Now, but what I think about this is everything, you should treat it as a PG-13 mentality, which is parental guidance. So what happens is parents will say, oh, no, it's bad, don't touch it. And some kids secretly do it anyway. Some kids wait till they go to college and they're not trained at all to be exposed to the real world. And so then they fall into that and they don't know how to moderate that. And then they fall into heavy addiction, right, to anything. So first, for parental guidance, first of all, I think you need to help your children select the games they play carefully, because some games teach you creativity. A lot of games teach you problem solving. You have an objective, you have your current resources, you have obstacles. The game is to figure out how to use your current resources creatively to overcome obstacles, reach your objective, right? That's actually more like what we do in our work, right? As opposed to what we learn in school, which is memorize a bunch of things and regurgitate on a piece of paper. And there's games that teach better socialization skills. The Minecraft, I think, is a popular game where it actually teaches delayed gratification, right? You have to plan and work to have something you're proud of, not just click, 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 click. So, but my key thing is about guidance. And you as a parent, you want to think about what are good games, right? So Minecraft, for some parents, they think the children's thinking about creativity, self-expression, planning. You don't just click a button and kill enemies, click, 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 kill, 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 kill. You actually are thinking about what you're building and seeing the results and modifying that. Some games teaches social skills and group work and team building. So I think, like I said, it's good for you to be part of that journey with your children. And just like, again, when you watch a movie, you see people do bad things in a movie, right? And you say, hey, that's a bad guy, that's an evil, that's a villain. We don't want to do that, right? And in a game, it's the same thing. Like, hey, there's bad stuff in the game, whatnot, that's bad. But you don't stop your children from watching all movies so they've never seen an evil act been done, because sooner or later they're gonna have to see it in the real world, and they need to be able to handle that intelligently. This is like, we also don't teach people in school how to have healthy marriages, right? How to maintain good relationships, how to care for each other or manage our finances, right? And so a lot of people get into a marriage without, the only thing they have is watch their parents do it. And a lot of parents don't do it very well either because they've never had education. And it just kind of tumbles from there. And then there's a stigma about finding marriage counsel, right? It's like, oh, that means I'm like dysfunctional. That's what we need, marriage counsel, right? So because it's not built, there's no guidance throughout their journey. And so I think for games, for media, for entertainment, it's to guide them through this journey and teach them how to interact, just like how you would teach them to deal with their anger, right? Just like, don't ever be angry. You're never allowed to be angry. Like, that doesn't work, right? You said, no, understand you feel angry, but you have to think about a different angle. You have to control that anger. You have to let go of that anger, right? So that's my viewpoint on technology in general.
Yeah, I mean, you just described Proverbs 22:6, right? Like this idea of raising up our children in the way they should go. So when they're grown, they don't stray from it. And not that that's a promise that if we, then they will never make a mistake, but this parental duty, or Deuteronomy 6, right? This promise, or this, instruction for us to talk about the Lord and talk about his ways when we rise up and when we lie down and when we go out and when we come back, and doing that in all areas, man. I'm super encouraged. I really appreciate your time with us, Yu-kai. I think there are a lot of other questions that we could cover, and a lot of wisdom we could glean from your experience and from your insights. So
if your audience is interested, happy to come back more times and share.
Well, man,
always happy to share God's work in my life and how it can help others.
Man, that's awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you again for being here with us. And sorry, before we go, how can people find you, your book, your website, your information?
Yeah, so maybe the most concentrated way is my website, yukaicchou.com, yukaicchou.com. You can reach, yes, you can find me on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and if you let me know that whoever mentions the faith, our shared faith, usually I pretty much always respond. I get a lot of messages because I have a lot of readers, but I try to respond to every person who mentions our shared faith, because I always want to prioritize, God's business over my business.
That's awesome. Well, and thank you for doing that for this conversation. We are so blessed to have had this time. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And thanks to you all for listening. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. I hope you'll go back and listen to some of those amazing points that Yu-kai points out. I hope that you will engage this conversation with your children, with your spouse, with your friends, about what does it look like to share Jesus in our tech world and to be lights in dark places. And I hope you'll join us next week as we continue this conversation about how we can love God and use tech.